Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody. This is the policy meeting of Council Rock School District. It is September 9th. I am Tracy Osecki. I'll be chairing tonight's meeting, and we're going to start with a roll call to my left.
Nicole Khan, School Board.
Matthew McCarthy, Tech Integration.
Yota Pali School Board.
Bob Hickey, School Board.
Ann Warner, School Board.
Ron Spring, HR Director.
Andy Sanko, Superintendent.
Don Mahalik, Council Rock Security.
Linda Stone, School Board.
Okay. And I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Spring, please.
Thank you so much. So, thank you all. Today's meeting is really a review of policies that went through the first read. We're required to do two reads, a first read and a second read of those policies, unless the board decides otherwise. These are all either new policies or amending policies based on the needs of the district. So these are all policies that we have reviewed. Some it's a second time in the policy committee. Some it's a third time in the policy committee. Some things came up. There's been some discussions between meetings to help facilitate moving these policies ahead. So we're going to start off today, again, with, we'll start off with the diabetes management policy. Again, this is a policy, model policy set forth by school boards, PSBA, dealing with diabetes management. It both addresses to the ability of students to self-administer as opposed to other medications that may be required by students. So speaking to Mr. Devlin, he did reach out to the parents that he was aware of that had students with health plans indicating diabetes. He shared the policy with them. And really speaking with him, it's very similar to, it is what we do now, but just putting it in policy. So I don't know if there was any comments or questions with respect to this policy. Again, this is second read for the policy committee, but I wanted to share it as well, see if there's any comments on it.
Questions?
Did we get any feedback from any of the community outreach?
I believe there were a few people who called Mr. Devlin, I think it was 3, asked, looking at the policy, does this change anything? Mr. Devlin indicated that it doesn't. It's really just putting everything down in a policy at what we're doing. But that was the only feedback that I'm aware of.
So this is really more of a formality to get it on paper and into our policy or catalog or handbook or whatever you would call it.
I'm glad that we reached out to the parents. I think that was a really important idea.
Any other questions on this, comments? So the next one we'll talk about, and I'm going to really kind of skip school wellness since we have Mr. Mahalik here, is the threat assessment policy and the school security personnel policy. Again, these are policies that are strongly recommended for liability purposes from PSBA. We have reviewed these several times. Mr. Mahalik's here though, in case any questions do come up. Again, the threat assessment policy is very much codifying a lot of what we do now. Mr. Mahalik does have oversee threat assessment teams to ensure that students are provided with the support and the help that they need going forward, and that the team's responsibilities are, monitoring and potential threats to self or others, and coming up with a management plan to help support those students, and also help support the school and the district are being done. Again, this is something that we have been doing. Mr. Mahalik has been on the forefront of it, but I wanted to bring him in as well in case he wants to add anything or answer any questions with respect to it.
Would you like me to opine or you want to ask questions?
I had a question.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
just, when you talk about a committee, is it one committee across the whole district? Is it,
So there's, and I like to refer to this as a behavioral threat assessment policy, because it's focused on behaviors. There is one district-wide committee, behavioral threat assessment committee, that incorporates mental health, psychologists, social workers, school nurse even, representatives from police departments, security, Andy, Al, Nicole, any principals impacted are all invited to a meeting we have monthly, where we go over any issues that pop up with students that have been identified, and we work through it to figure out what's the best way to help that student. Additionally, each school has its own, they call them different names depending on the school, but they have their own team, crisis intervention team, which does it on a school level too. And then they look at students in crisis or crisis situations, and then they would refer cases they feel they need to come up to the district level team.
thank you.
Other questions?
Yes. So does that mean that you are deemed the safety and security coordinator?
Yes, sir.
And would you be involved in both the district-wide group as well as the individual school groups?
I coordinate the district-wide group, and I liaison with the schools only because the schools tend to trigger their crisis intervention teams, you know, for the elementary schools when there's a need. So it's not a regular thing for a lot of the schools.
Okay. This policy does a good job of providing a definition of bias, the attitudes or beliefs we have about a person or a group that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in a conscious or subconscious manner on the first page. Under guidelines, item number 3, identifying and avoiding racial, cultural, or disability bias. Are those the only biases that are recognized to be avoided?
No, I think, again, this was I know when we do the threat assessment team, we don't generally look at any of that. We look at behaviors. We look at behaviors that occurred in school, behaviors that occurred out of school, and strategies to address behavioral issues that indicate that a student is in crisis. We generally, the student's name is there, there's no other identifiers at all. So we're not looking at anything other than behaviors.
And I understand it that this information is provided to presumably this school board, well, not this school board, but the Council Rock School Board, on an annual basis.
Correct.
Okay, and that would probably remove the identifiers of an individual's name at that time.
Correct.
But internally, you also receive that information where those identifiers are probably present, or are they also omitted?
I'm not following that question.
Meaning the individual students' names or teachers' names?
Yeah, when we get a referral, their name is of course there because we need to know who the student is.
Okay,
Because that triggers, so one of the things with the behavioral threat assessment that is very important is that there needs to be a 360-degree approach to it. So, and as we've had in many instances, you know, what happens outside of a school comes into a school, and what happens inside the school goes out of the school. So the name is important because it helps us connect external and internal situations to be able to address it. And that's the important part of the name.
okay. There's also bold on, I guess this is the 3rd or 4th page, the district shall annually provide mandatory training for school staff on identification or recognition of student behavior that may indicate a threat to the safety of the student, other students, school employees, or other individuals, school facilities, or the community, in accordance with the law, board policy, and the standards specified by the State School Safety and Security Committee. So who is that information being provided to? And the training, is that identified as far as how that training is stipulated and who receives it?
So under Act 55, all school personnel is supposed to undergo threat assessment training, behavioral threat assessment training, and the state actually has free online training modules that have been pushed out to all school staff in order for them to go through and go through the threat assessment training process. Last year, I think we did the first 2 modules we had staff do. This year, we're going to have them do the next 2. I think there's 7 modules. So
Who publishes those modules?
it's a state,
The state. Okay.
PCCD, I believe. It's a state mandate and it's a state regulated training module.
And from that, do you find, with your background and your experience and the focus from your perspective on behavior, that that's consistent with the modules, or do the modules discuss other things?
No, so the state of Pennsylvania wrote its behavioral threat assessment law with the Secret Service. The Secret Service has been the subject matter expert for most states in the country who have wanted to incorporate and create a behavioral threat assessment team off of its studies of assassins and school shooters. So they've been the one to inform the states about how to create the law and also how to create the training so the training is appropriate, focused and targeted on a behavioral assessment.
Okay. So you say you've been doing this, I'm assuming at least a year, but maybe less, depending upon certain parameters. So without obviously giving names, are you able to provide a percentage or a number of how many students have been identified by this committee?
So this was actually in force when I was hired. They were actually doing a version of this before I was hired. And then we've just made sure to update, upgrade it, and make sure it's in compliance with the law. As far as give you a percentage, I'd have to go back and look. We could give a percentage, I mean.
Just, yeah, a rough,
Yeah,
a guess,
yeah.
It's a very small percentage.
right? Okay.
I think we're going to discuss that at the executive session as well next week, so maybe.
Maybe in more specifics.
And
Yeah.
well, and one of the things I wanted to point out for the committee to keep in mind with recent events in Georgia is the student in Georgia had a threat issued in May of 2023. The FBI and the local police went out to investigate the threat. The student said, and he used the name Adam Lanza, which was the Newtown school shooter. That was the name he used online. He denied posting that threat. It was on a gaming app, I think. He denied posting that threat. The father said he had weapons available, but his son couldn't access them unless they were under his supervision. Subsequently, the FBI referred that to the local jurisdiction, who then, we think, we don't know yet, referred it to the local school for monitoring evaluation. The student's family moved to another district. So we don't know if that information followed that student or not. And I say this because that is where the threat assessment process is critical, because the police department, if it was the same police department covering those 2 school districts like we tend to have here, that information would have transferred over to the school district. Absent that, you have a child that was indicating a pretty serious threat that is now in another school district who has no idea that the child has exhibited that behavior.
Exactly.
So.
And I think that's where the rubber meets the road in this policy. On the one hand, I completely agree that we need to be doing this. We need to be analyzing and looking for threats. And I believe so far your job in Council Rock has done that very well, as attributed to the low numbers. On the other hand, I think that this is where they say also the devil is in the details. On the one hand, this process could take a long time to go through, to identify a threat, to discuss it, to go through this whole element, and then decide what to do, whether to act on it or not. On another hand, this process could also potentially misidentify a threat, or maybe entirely prematurely identify a threat. And that's a big area between somebody who is effectively innocent and about to be guilty to somebody who is an imminent threat, as this policy.
So let me help the committee understand how the threats come to us. The threats generally come to us, to be safe to say, where a threat is made. I'm going to shoot up the school, which we've had. Identify the student, we do an investigation, we involve the police, we involve the social workers, we put a discipline situation happens, the police may or may not charge depending on the situation, and then there's follow-up on the school's part, social workers, counselors, whatever. We have students in school that will say something that's threatening. Then we follow up on it, do the same kind of process. Parents call, other students report. So most of the threats you're referring to are coming from reports. It's not we're doing the CIA probe investigation saying, all right, that kid, he looks like he's a threat. We're not doing it. These are reported threats that are identified from students, staff, anonymously, safe to say, or coming in from local law enforcement that we are then looking at and we're identifying, we're mitigating. And thanks to where we live, because we have a small community and we have a great connectivity with the first responders, with the counselors, with the mental health people, we're able to assess and address situations pretty rapidly. And to be able to put them on a path to mitigation. In most cases, the path to mitigation is a mental health resource. It's crisis intervention, it's counseling, referring a family to KNS, which we have plenty of. In the minority of cases, it goes to a judicial route. So it's not generally a long process. It's generally a short process. And it's not that we're searching for threats. We're getting reports of threats and we're handling them.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that's comforting and that helps. It would be nice if some of this information was articulated to some degree a little bit better in this. And obviously nobody wants one of these horrible things to occur here. And that's why I think this board is serious, and you're obviously serious about reviewing this and making sure we get it upgraded, to use your word, in the proper way. At the same point, this doesn't seem to indicate, it was alluded to a little bit in what you're talking about, as far as if a student leaves, after this process, after the parent has been notified and everybody's looked at stuff, what happens then, right? What happens, how long is a student observed? What happens if the student leaves Council Rock, graduates, goes to college, versus leaves Council Rock and then attends another public school or even a private school? Do we get similar records from other schools when students come to us? And how is that evaluated based upon understanding that maybe the student's behavior has been mitigated and won't repeat, versus maybe it's not, right? I think that that's where.
I know in my short tenure here, we've had one or two situations where we've got students come and enroll, and we've got a phone call from a local jurisdiction that has said, just FYI, this, and this, and this. And immediately is a conversation I generally have with the local authorities and with the school, and try to find out where it's at, and if there's anything we need to do or if it's been handled. In a lot of cases, and in these cases, it was just a matter of awareness. Nothing more. Because nobody wants to unintentionally, put a student in a box they don't belong. So in a lot of cases, it's more about awareness, just being aware. Watch students, there's the normal adjustment period when students come into the school, so you want to pay attention to them anyway to make sure they're getting along. As far as what we do when we leave school, I know we transfer records, but I don't know what the full policy is with that, since I don't deal with the kids transferring out.
Regarding, I think, the reports and the way you say this gets involved, we've seen, I've observed or heard of or been in contact with these, similar to what you described, the student denies it. Oh, it's no big deal. Or the big line that I hear a lot in these is, I was just joking, right? That's the one line that gets repeated a lot. The other thing is, if a student or somebody feels that they're potentially in threat, there wouldn't you agree, increased likelihood of lying, saying the same thing. I was just joking, it's not a big deal, as a way to just get the heat off their back, as it were. And so I think that we've seen false reports get made where a student is trying to use this as leverage against maybe another student, justly or unjustly, and you find out the report turns to be not credible. We've seen the other side where the student just says, I was just joking and I wasn't being serious. That's a difficult balance to navigate through. Was this being used in retaliation being reported? Is the student being sincere? Are they you know, were they legitimately just joking, or is this just a way to get you off the doorstep, so to speak?
I found in my tenure here that almost like juries in America generally get to the right decision, I found that when it comes to threats, the reports that come in are accurate. There's not, if the kids are weaponizing, safe to say, it's vaping, cutting class, they're not weaponizing it for threats, as far as my tenure here. When they report a threat, there is something to it, generally speaking. If a kid makes a denial, that's why we have a stakeholder approach to this. And that's why we bring in the social workers, that's why we bring in the local law enforcement. It's amazing the treasure trove of information the local police departments have from interacting with people in the community. So they might deny something, but there might be a bigger picture. And in some cases, it might be a family dysfunctional situation. But that's an avenue for us to be able to address it via, hey, we have counseling, we have social services, we have health. So I haven't seen the threat being weaponized, vaping, that kind of stuff. The threat, no. And I've seen a lot of the threat reporting that we've had come in, whether it's safe to say or from students and teachers, have some credibility to it. Now, what we do with it is a different question. How we get to the end result, different depending on each situation.
And ultimately, at the end of this, regardless whether you find it credible or not, information is being provided to the family. Hey, we have these resources for you, but you can lead the horse to water, you can't make it to drink. It's up to that family to act upon that or dismiss it, and that, depending upon the severity.
Well, and that's where the stakeholder approach is critical, having local law enforcement involved in it, because ultimately, if you make a threat, even a verbal threat, local law enforcement can still charge for that threat. So there's always that threat of, look, and that generally tends to motivate families to, hey, we're offering you an olive branch here to help. Your kid is in crisis. Why don't you? Most of them take the path of least resistance and take the offer of help, especially because we're paying for it. We'll just say we're paying for it. So they're not generally denying it. There might be some initial denial, but overall they get to the point of, okay, we're going to get our kids some help. And then for the truly egregious cases, they get charged. And then what ends up happening is now you have the way the judicial system say you will go get counseling, you will do this, you will go do that. So then you have that also to help facilitate that holistic approach to trying to address students' issues or families' issues in some cases.
Right. Thank you for your responses.
I have a quick follow-up, may I?
Go ahead.
So you said that if a kid makes a threat, sometimes it's a signal that the kid is in crisis. Could you elaborate on that? I mean, based on your experience, what does that say to you?
So, I'll use an example. We had a student say, if things don't change by a certain age, I'm going to shoot up the school. Okay? Clear threat. There's no vagary there. That's a threat. So in that situation, after looking at it from the threat assessment perspective with the stakeholders, the social workers, the counselors, the child had some anxiety issues about being in a big school environment, was not making friends, was not adjusting well, needed a different environment, smaller environment, and a more supportive environment to help him be able to adjust to school and not be able to go to school and feel comfortable. So his threat was coming from a perspective of, I hate being here because I'm afraid. So we were able to take steps to make sure the student was in a better situation. And he's been fine since. And we had some law enforcement support with it too.
So it could just be that the student is very unhappy and they don't like the school situation, and then they make a threat without thinking exactly what they're saying?
Not in this situation. This situation was a true mental health situation.
Okay.
Not in this one. No. And I haven't seen a student, like I said, it's like juries. Juries tend to get the right decision. I don't think we've seen a threat come through in my tenure here where it's been abused. Most of the time, there is some reason why the threat is made, and we want to address it. And we want to help the kid,
Right.
help the family in many ways.
Thank you.
Mr. Hickey?
Just a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
I'm assuming that, I know all this information is confidential, and do you find any, like, repeat offenders, as it were?
No. We've had one or two students who made subsequent threats, but that's because they were crying out for help. But most of the time, they make a threat, it gets addressed.
And I guess this is for administration. Do we, if a student transfers or whatever, do we provide that information to the school that the student is transferring to? So will they get a copy of, hey, just so you know, we had, this individual, had a situation,
They will not get a copy, so whether the student is coming or going, there's a release of records that is required to enroll a student and get the information coming in or going out. And the families are asked on that, or the school is asked on that, if there's been an egregious infraction. For example, if it's a weapons violation, we have to disclose that, or a school coming to us, sending a student to us has to disclose that. And then we get the stakeholders together, like Don just talked about. We talk to the other school, we talk to the family, and even though they enroll as Council Rock students, they may not be attending a Council Rock school based on what's occurred in their previous school.
I'll just give a hypothetical, I guess. And you have a kid at Council Rock who threatens to shoot up the school for whatever reason. It's investigated, everything's okay, it's finally been, whatever the resolution was, assuming the kid's not put in jail or something like, he now wants to transfer to Pennsbury. Does Pennsbury get a notice that, hey, just so you know, student A did make a threat against the school 3 years ago?
On that release of records
Yes.
form, and I would have to look at it, but I think it says something like, have you ever been suspended or expelled and the reason for it? So if that is in the records, in our records, the school gets it. They're not going to know if somebody had a detention, but if they had an infraction that resulted in a consequence that violates our discipline policy, then they would have knowledge of it. Drug and alcohol infraction, weapons infraction, terroristic threat infraction.
Okay, that's it.
As a follow-up, if you're done,
I'm done, thank you.
follow-up, the release of records, is that just from PA, within PA, or is that no matter where they're transferring from?
It's wherever they're transferring from. So if we get a student from Florida or Texas,
We get that information.
we have the parents have to sign for release of records so that we get the high school or the elementary school in Florida before they come to Council Rock or Texas or Tennessee or wherever.
I think this is arguably one of the most important policies that we have. I'm glad that we are, putting it into our official records. I'm thrilled to see that we're intervening early. I think we have a great process for that and providing the resources for our kids, because it's about teaching our kids, that's what we really do, not just academically, but emotionally as well.
If
Thank
I
you, Don.
may, and it meets with the approval of the group because Don brought it up, if we could change the title or consider changing the title to behavioral threat assessment, that would align with the language of the state instead of just threat assessment. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Any objections? That's fine.
Good catch.
On that note, is there any, number 3, under guidelines, to list either more potential bias, or this provides literary evidence that there's only 3 biases that we're trying to avoid? And I would argue that there's lots more.
I don't know if I could tell you that these were the biases that were identified in the statute.
Yeah.
Like Don said, you try to avoid all biases. If there's, you can take a look at that from a wording standpoint. But the statute provides, this is from the word of the statute.
And inquiry and assessment items 2 and 4 cover bullying, cyberbullying, and hazing. which thankfully it seems like we don't have a report of, but those are areas that I think seem at least to be potentially weaponized to some degree, or potentially misused to another degree, or high probabilities for "I was just joking" responses. So identifying what that is, I think a lot of people have different understandings of what those terms actually mean. Hearing something that you don't like and don't agree with, in my book, doesn't equate bullying, right? Hearing a statement that you don't like or don't agree with over and over again from the same individual or individuals with the intent to bother, harm, upset could certainly arise to that definition.
I think the footnotes afterwards are citing to a state law.
Okay.
I'm looking at the back here where it says 19, it says, is that, Michael, PAL 249?
So 19 is, so, and I was just thinking, I was just gonna.
So I think those
mention,
are citing to state law.
2 and 3 are, like, not just state law, but those are referencing our policies. So we have a policy on bullying/cyberbullying. We have a policy on hazing, which defines what they are under the law.
Right.
That's what those are referencing to.
Because we can meet or exceed the state law guidelines, right? We still maintain our individual ability to do that.
But so these, well, these are, don't reference the law per se, these reference what
Our
our
policies,
policies.
right. So perhaps we should be reviewing these as well in concert?
We will be, yeah.
And in general, we have recently, probably a couple, over the summer, reviewed the bullying policy that they go through. But we are gonna be reviewing it again, and the hazing policy as well. These are all gonna be coming up for review. We're starting with the 200s, which fall under, which are pupil-based policies, and they're gonna be part of our cyclical review as we go through all our policies.
And just to reiterate, during our monthly board meeting, I raised comments about this. I still think that they're applicable as far as the information that we're, as a district, providing annually to students and teachers regarding this policy and regarding this content. I want to make sure that we are trying to encourage resilience over softening to victims. I think that that's an important element. That, you know, life is difficult for all of us, and we all have different thresholds for what we can tolerate. It would be wonderful if we could recognize how to be better to each other, but also help to make each other stronger instead of weaker.
Okay.
Thank you. So if we can, since to stay in the flow of having Mr. Mahalik here, the school security personnel policy, again, is a policy that codifies a lot of what we're doing. It talks about, in particular, the role of school resource officers, and again, it's very general, security guards, background checks, what type of services they provide, and so on. Mr. Mahalik has been on top of this from day one, with respect to training our security personnel. The biggest amendment to this policy, or change to this policy that we didn't have, but it is a recent change to the policy itself, deals with the position of school safety and security coordinator, and the appointment of a school safety and security coordinator under Act 55. And, you know, we're very lucky to have someone of Don's experience and expertise, and it talks about what happens if there's a vacancy. One of the things that we brought up was with respect to appointing someone to serve within 30 days of that vacancy. Looking at this, I believe, did have a version, I don't see it on this one, where he had to serve as, we added something in there about a temporary. And it was in the last policy, I apologize, I may have printed out.
Didn't we talk about wanting to make sure we had coverage constantly?
Yes, and I had So I apologize, I may have printed out a previous version of this, but there was a provision in there talking about, and I'll get that provision for the temporary as well. The goal was to make sure we had someone in there temporarily while we were looking for someone
Yes.
in a permanent position, and that was there, so I apologize that this version did not have that. I'll make sure the one at the board does. So really, I know, we've gone through this multiple times, so I don't know if there's any additional questions with respect to it. So I know Mr. Alex here, who's very well versed in obviously his role and the support of our security and SROs. We're lucky enough, and the board has supported the appointment of 2 new SROs at the middle school level, which is a testament to the board's support of the safety and security of our students, and knowing that that's a paramount role of the school district across the board, so thank you for that. And then if there's any questions that you may have for Don with respect to this.
It's just a comment of thank you getting those SROs in here for this school year to start, and I think that really helps for relieving a lot of anxiety for people.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Have all the vacancies been filled? I know you had some retirees and.
We have one vacancy that, because we moved an individual to another position, so we have one vacancy that we're going to be hiring for in South. But we're lucky to have plenty of backfill, so.
That vacancy, I'm sorry, Don, that vacancy occurred just as of retirement that happened on Thursday or Friday
Right.
of last week. Matt Barrett retired from Council Rock, and his spot was filled internally, so the spot that was vacated is open, and we're in the process with that.
It's being advertised, we're taking in applications.
To Don's point though, and being on top of things, that position is vacant, we're looking to hire, but there's someone in that, filling in that position. So the school has its full allotment of security personnel, it's not down any type
No,
of security.
no, it's full.
That was, all right, thank you.
We have a full security complement every day.
Thank you.
Ms. Polly?
So I just want to remind everybody that there is a safety and security subcommittee that most of you have not been a part of so far, except Anne and Ed and Job are missing. But when we have our executive session coming up, you will see that there's a lot of reporting happening and a lot of discussion similar to what we have here, as well as resources required and so on. So I think it's a good idea to have that open to everybody as an executive session. So, because I know there's a lot of questions that you never hear the answers to. So that's the next Thursday, right?
Thursday at 6, you should have received an email and an Outlook invitation from Al Funk.
That's great.
So on the security personnel, how do we resolve this 30-day vacancy? Can you, I'm just going to make a suggestion, I don't know if it's right or not, or good or bad, but can we make the suggestion that either the second in command or the superintendent be the school safety and security coordinator during the 30-day vacancy?
We don't really have a second in command.
Right.
It's Don, and then we have people that report to Don.
Right, so for example, God forbid, Don says, I'm done with this, I took too many questions from Roosevelt last night, I'm out, right? Would that fall to you, Andy, as a superintendent? Because currently this policy doesn't read.
Yeah, we are obligated to have a coordinator by way of PD under Act 55. So we would have to alert PD, whether, and it could fall to me, that's fine.
Can we have that language added to this before this gets?
Yeah, right, so we had it, the terminology of a temporary.
Temporary.
So if there's a vacancy, it gives Dr. Sanko the ability to appoint a temporary school safety and security officer, pending the appointment of permanent within 30 days.
Because I'm reading this within 30 days in both paragraphs.
Right.
So does that mean there's a 30-day window for the superintendent to identify a new individual? But it doesn't seem to imply that the superintendent is the new individual for that 30 days.
Right, well, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we talked about was that Dr. Sanko would appoint a temporary within that 30 days.
Right.
Until a permanent is.
I understand. I'm suggesting 30 days is too long. So within that 30-day window, would it be the superintendent? And that should be reflected in this policy. Not that I'm trying to put it on Andy.
Maybe it won't be, it might be someone else.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, you are responsible for
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, if Don decides tonight he's not coming back tomorrow, it's likely that it would take us more than 30 days to find a Don replacement.
Yep.
Right? So somebody has to fulfill that role just by way of compliance with PDE. So I'm fine if we put in there the superintendent. I know we talked about temporary. I'm fine if we do that and that we appoint somebody for that window, however the board feels that it.
Or superintendent or is designee.
I think we would have to do it immediately, I think is your point. You're not going to wait 30 days, right?
How about we do this? You change the language to say that, Don leaves tomorrow. The superintendent immediately assumes the role until he appoints a temporary safety and security coordinator within 30 days. I think Mike's worried about from zero to 30, who's in charge? So if we make you in charge, sorry, Andy, but you're the most logical. The superintendent will be the temporary one until he or she appoints a temporary one within a 30-day time frame. And then it takes care of that. There's no gap in coverage.
My understanding is that the superintendent is always in charge, and that's his role. He steps in at any time and appoints temporary personnel. I mean, if we have to explicitly say it, we would, but that's his role. I mean, he is the boss. He decides everything.
I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with Ms. Polly. It's not like Dr. Sanko is gonna say, oh, I'm gonna leave this vacant position for the next 0 to 30 days. He would step in and in the meantime.
Of course he would,
Exactly.
but, Dr. Sanko's not going to be the superintendent forever. It doesn't hurt to,
The super,
yeah.
Whoever is the superintendent.
And I'm not sure, maybe I'm reading it differently. The way I see it is the superintendent has 30 days to appoint a permanent
Right.
safety. So if something happens to the current one, either within that 30 days of the new safety and security coordinator appointed, it would either be, I guess the question is whether it's going to be Dr. Sanko assuming that role or Dr. Sanko appointing someone temporarily to assume that role, pending the appointment of the permanent person within 30 days.
I completely agree with Mrs. Pally regarding the superintendent being the ultimate authority. But this is language, and this is written in a fashion where lawyers like to argue over. And God forbid this gets to that point where something does happen, and this needs to be evaluated with regard to it, because somebody doesn't want to be held financially, personally liable. That's where I think that it shouldn't be as ambiguous. Because I agree with the sentiment around here. We need constant coverage, and the superintendent's the authority. I don't know where the best place to put that. Is there an overall one, or does it happen here, or do we restate it? But right here, the way it's written, a lawyer could argue that there's a 30-degree hold, a 30-day hold.
And this may or may not be, it sounds like it is not the most recent version. So I'm a little uncomfortable altogether, making any changes if we don't know that this is the most. Can you make a change and email it to us? Is that
Sure.
Sunshine approved?
Sure, and I think the only change we had was that we had the superintendent shall appoint a temporary school administrator to serve as school safety and security coordinator pending the superintendent, and then the same wording, appointing another school administrator to serve as school safety and security within 30 days. So I can definitely prepare that and send it to everyone. But the question is, do we want the superintendent, I guess my question is, do we want the superintendent to appoint another administrator as the temporary safety and security? Or the other thing I'm hearing is, do we want it to actually be the superintendent who is the temporary safety.
I think that's up to the
Yeah, he
superintendent.
can appoint whoever, he can,
No,
he
he
can,
can do it, he could.
he can appoint you.
Or designate?
Yeah.
I think he should appoint the human resources guy. No.
I mean, it's like, I think most other policies or that we have, the superintendent or designee
That's right.
shall,
Pick up those.
will immediately
I think that.
take the temporary
I think that
position.
covers the whole that Mr. Roosevelt has pointed out.
Yes,
If it's done immediately, whether it's the superintendent or
Correct.
the designee, it happens immediately and then.
as the temporary,
Right,
yes.
and then the formal, long-term person would be appointed within 30 days.
What if we can't find somebody? within
Yeah, that's an
30 days?
absurd thing to
It
say.
doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be done. Let's say Don leaves tomorrow and it takes us 60 days, as long as we have someone appointed.
Am I the only one who's uncomfortable at not having a backup, Dawn? As we talk about this, and as I said, like, this stuff is some of the most important stuff that we do as a school district. Dawn, like, where are we if you get hit by a bus? Like, should we be thinking about having a backup, Dawn? Should that be on our list of
Let's say win the
hiring
lottery.
for next year? Yeah, win the lottery, all right. So tomorrow you win the lottery. No, but as we think about hiring and, you know, you guys, the administration came to us with a list of positions we wanted filled this year, and we were happy to fill those. But, you know, I would like to put it on your radar. Maybe a backup Dawn needs to be a position.
Like, in the hierarchy of things, who is below, you? Like, is there a pecking order, or is there someone that you could,
Andy Peck's on me.
I mean, is there someone that, like, say, that you could elevate to more like, say, an assistant or supervisory, something where he's that intermediary in case, even if you were sick for a week, you know, something, you know, where it doesn't necessarily fall on Andy, someone with the security experience.
So some of that goes to bargaining agreements. Don is an Act 93 employee, everybody else is a Cresta employee.
Okay. All right. Something to think about.
Yeah, I think that, let's think about that for,
Even when we talk about like the PCCD grant and funding, right, that could be,
right, yeah.
So I'll make the change with respect to superintendent or his designee immediately assuming the role pending the appointment. And I'll email out to everyone.
Dawn, stay away from buses, lottery tickets.
Got it.
Don't jump into any burning buildings, please.
And
I'm
Rosie?
gonna look 3 times for
And
it.
stay away from Roosevelt.
She just put a jinx.
All right, thanks, Ron.
I have a
Oh, so Pally, sorry, Ms.
So
Pally.
I think, this was all funny, but I think the district is very serious about succession planning. And I know there are several initiatives and, you know, that falls under the same umbrella.
Yes.
Because, you know, even if someone doesn't live, they may get sick or whatever, so we have to have that. So, and I know Dr. Sango has talked to me several times about his general succession planning for like different positions and development of employees.
Correct.
So I assume that falls under that umbrella as well.
It does.
Thank you.
Don't buy any lottery tickets.
So does that put this policy under another first read?
I don't think so. As long as you get us an email version with the updates soon, I think we can move to a second read.
Just make sure at the meeting that change gets clarified to the public that we did it.
Yeah, and it's similar to, you know, we're making a potential change as well to, for instance, the discipline of students convicted or adjudicated of sexual assault. So any change would be similar to that change. But before we jump to that, we touch base on the school wellness policy. You know, and again, these amendments are primarily required and mandated. I believe they were mandated probably at least 2 years ago. And this is a conversation I had with Mr. Rapp as recently again as today, when we were discussing this policy, is that there is a need for these amendments per federal regulation, because if we do get audited, we could, without these modifications, we could be in jeopardy of losing funding from our federal food service program, and potentially going back as well. So again, this is something that Mr. Rapp has been passionate about and pointed out right away. It is a change, I believe, going back to 2021, I believe was the change. Don't hold me to that, but it's been several years ago, at least with respect to the need for a wellness committee, the need for a triannual review of the policy. And again, these are all federally mandated changes with respect to this policy. And I know we have spoken about it multiple times again, but if there's any questions or thoughts on it, please.
I have a question.
Yes.
So where do we stand on a wellness committee as of now?
Mr. Rapp is going to be working on creating it. I know Mr. Ricardo volunteered on behalf of the board to be the board member who's part of it. There have been people who have indicated their interest. One of the coordinators, whether it's PD, stuff like that, have indicated their desire to be on it as well. So he is working on it.
So they'll meet sometime this fall or sometime in the.
I'll have to get you the
What do you
answer from
think?
that from Mr. Rapp. I don't know what his schedule is with respect to the exact timeline.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is that something that's happening?
It is happening, it will be happening
This year?
this year, 100%. I just don't know what his timeline is.
Other questions? Apologize for jumping in front there.
This policy seems to be exclusive to diet and exercise, correct?
Primarily, yes.
Right, because I recall at the most recent school board meeting, it seemed to allude, or at least be a little bit more open to include lots of other definitions that might fall into the category of healthy school environment. So has that been, I see there's another version here with lots of red lines.
Correct, that's
And
the
then
clean copy.
this is the clean copy. So the clean copy seems to be exclusive, or at least from what I'm looking at, exclusive to diet and exercise. So has the other open-ended stuff been removed?
I don't
Or
think there
was I
were
looking at
any.
potentially another version
Can you,
weeks ago?
when you say open-ended?
Well, the first page, we're talking about promote, a school environment that promotes student wellness. So wellness could mean lots of things, could be mental wellness, right? Could be a lot of different things. So that's one example. So I thought the prior version that mentioned wellness committee was, the prior version had both school environment and health as well as student health. So I thought that it was a little bit back and forth. And are we talking about either the student wellness, or are we speaking about the school wellness, right? And then when we're talking about a school environment, the environment could mean a lot of different things.
Do you have an example that you're looking
Well,
at?
the previous school board meeting, I made comments about this. And as I'm
So this
reading
is-
through this, I find this clean version to be a lot less ambiguous. So I'm trying to be a little bit more precise on, is this exclusive to diet and exercise? Does it encompass other elements of what we're defining as a healthy, or what, school environment that's healthy?
So, just to clarify, I did print this from the last board agenda.
Okay.
So this is the identical policy that was on the last board agenda. That being said, I think, it talks about wellness, particularly related to physical well-being, nutrition. It does talk about how that is addressed in school. I don't want to say exclusively, I believe exclusively, but I don't want to say that because it's a very broad policy. When it talks about the wellness community, it's looking at our food service providers, how nutrition is discussed in a healthy lifestyle from a nutritional standpoint, and physical activity standpoint, is provided to our students in an age-appropriate manner. And it talks about nutrition outside of food services, which we're required to have in the policy dealing with, not competitive foods that may be in the school at the time during the school day and so on. I'm not sure that.
If we were out of compliance, is this the policy that we used as, was it a boilerplate that was used to create
This was
this policy?
based on the model from PSBA.
So
To ensure-
what may be the issue is that the title school wellness is what makes it confusing.
Well, there was more
Maybe that's it.
confusing, I thought, before. This seems cleaner, and I just find that we can talk about other elements of school wellness, but this seems to be appropriately clean as far as just dealing with nutrition and exercise. And I don't know if it's helpful to articulate that, but when I read a sentence, school environment that promotes student wellness, that's pretty broad, open-ending, and vague. When I look at to ensure health and well-being of all students, health and well-being is also a little open-ended and vague. However, the rest of this policy seems to be particular to diet, exercise, access to water fountains, wellness committee, record keeping, as it pertains to diet, exercise, as a definition of school or student wellness. So there might be other areas that are important to discuss, but perhaps that's another policy, just as a lot of these dovetail into each other. Maybe it will, but that's where
This is more specific.
I'm particularly zeroing in on some of the broad ones where something else could get lumped in, and we're approving something where something else comes in later that dovetails with it, instead of doing them together as companion pieces. So,
But this will meet the requirement that we are lacking right now.
Yes, from a federal.
well, we currently have a policy on nutrition and physical exercise. It's not like Council Rock doesn't have such a policy.
Correct.
We're just amending it. We're adding it, we're editing it. That's what this is.
Correct, but the amendment, and that's 100% correct, the amendment, though, is what brings us into compliance. And I believe this was brought in front of the board several years ago with these amendments. I'm not sure, for some reason, by the previous liaison, policy liaison, it wasn't approved at the time. But at that time, that would have brought us into compliance. For whatever reason, it was well before me, it was not approved, so Mr. Rapp realized that, raised his concerns, again, from a fiscal auditing standpoint, and we felt that it was imperative to make sure that we get this so we are in compliance.
So do you have an objection to
Well,
letting this move forward as
As it's written,
it's
no.
written?
No, that's why we're sitting around here talking about this, right? I mean, for
But there's a-
example, does a
yeah.
school eat and drink? No, the building doesn't eat and drink, students that are within it do. A school doesn't exercise, a building couldn't move. If the building moves, you've got structural problems and you've got other issues, right? So is this school wellness or is this, student body? So I'm not trying to be too particular here, but at the same point, I recognize the seriousness of all what we're doing, which doesn't mean that we should just accept the first thing and say, good, we're covered. I think that's why we sit around this table. That's why we volunteer our time to the education of students and making sure that they've got proper education and that extends to physical activity and nutrition.
And I'll say, calling it a school wellness policy or a student wellness policy will not affect our compliance.
Right.
So, however the board, whatever the board deems appropriate.
Why did it get changed from student to school? That was just the
That was the.
PSBA.
Yeah. And I think because it's more global, it's definitely more global, and the wellness committee is looking at the school in total rather than just the individual. The individual student is looking more at, you know, what are the nutritional steps that the school is taking, what.
If we're talking about what foods is the cafeteria serving, that does seem more applicable to a school versus a student who may be bringing lunch or whatever.
And I think it also talks about school-wide policies that principals have within their buildings, right? I mean, it's not just lunches, it's about snacks and parties and other things that fall within the school wellness of, like, the entire student body or the population of the students, not individually.
Okay. I think if there are no further comments, we'll move on.
Mike, where
Oh, we have another one.
okay, I just don't understand that we've left this up in the air.
I think we're okay with it. Mr. Roosevelt?
I think we're very close to getting this to a yes. I don't have a problem with passing a policy that deals with the nature that is written in here. I want to make sure that we're, for example, I'll ask this question. Is the wellness committee exclusive to nutrition and activity? And is the wellness committee part of the threat assessment team?
No, the wellness committee is not part of that assessment team. And what the wellness committee has defined here is looking at, and I believe it's in the third paragraph under wellness committee, evidence-based strategies and techniques addressing nutritional education, physical activity, and other school-based activities to promote wellness, student wellness as part of the policy. So again, it's to your point, Ms. Rosewood, this wellness committee is primarily focused on, you know, nutrition, food services, you know, what's being provided to our students from a nutritional standpoint, and the physical activity aspect of that as well.
So if the wellness committee is not part of the threat assessment team, is the threat assessment team part of the wellness committee? That's the other way to look at it.
Are you trying to separate to make sure that these committees are separate, that you're not having?
Yeah, I'm trying to make
So-
sure that those wellness committee and this policy is exclusive to nutrition and exercise. And if we're talking exclusively about nutrition and exercise as the quote environment, I think that we should be specific to that, and maybe even further amend this policy title and some of these to be exclusive to that. For example, in 3 months, are we going to have another policy that talks about school wellness as it pertains to something else that dovetails into this, and all of a sudden, school wellness encompasses more than just nutrition and exercise? And maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. I just want to deal with it at companion pieces at the same time instead of the cart before the horse. And remove some of the ambiguous language that's within it.
Ms. Winter, did you finish? I wasn't sure if I understood your question.
So if you want to separate because they're under each policy, right? So if a committee is under, say, the threat committee, they wouldn't be a part of this, right?
Mike,
Wouldn't
I don't
be
know.
able to-
Mike doesn't,
That's
the
my-
term wellness is where Mike's hung
You're
up.
So what would it, do you want school and student wellness? Is that, you want specific wording?
No, he
I'm not following what.
he wants student nutrition and physical activity wellness. I'm speaking for Mike, sorry if I'm wrong.
This is what helps.
He's taking wellness and incorporating everything into wellness. Social, emotional, mental, all that other stuff. This policy strictly deals with nutrition and exercise. So I think Mike would be happier if we changed it to student nutrition and physical wellness. That way you take the mental out of it, you take anything else out of it that Mike thinks may be ambiguous. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not saying I agree or disagree.
I'm glad somebody's picking up what I'm putting down.
He wants to change wellness to not wellness. He wants to be, since this is nutrition and exercise, then make it nutrition and exercise and take wellness out of it, because wellness is too all-encompassing for Mike's liking.
Right, so if there's other areas of wellness that belong in this policy, let's discuss it. If there are other areas of wellness from other aspects that we should have policies on that are kind of companion to this, we should discuss that policy at the same time. If they're not, if this is exclusive to nutrition and exercise, then let's stipulate that. And it could be, to Bob's point, school, student, nutritional and activity or fitness wellness. If you want it, wellness really needs to stay in there. That's my point.
Mr. Spring, are you able to speak to Mr. Roosevelt's question about companion policies as it relates to student wellness?
I'm not aware of companion policies that would fall and would.
That exist currently.
Correct. Well, I don't know in the future.
Right.
But as of now, I'm not aware of any policies that would fall under this with respect to student health and wellness as required under the wellness committee as defined under this federal regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And
But we don't know what the future is going to bring.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that, you know, the plan is to go through all of the policies, and we are starting with the policies that relate to students. Now, which policies relating to, you know, which of the 200 policies we're going to discuss, I leave that to Mr. Spring. He, you know, he comes to us and says, these are the ones that I think we should address, and we go in that order.
And Mr. Roosevelt, to your point, and I understand not knowing what the future brings, we do get updates through PSBA if there are, you know, amendments, future upcoming policies that potentially can affect policies that we currently have, and how we would integrate them into our current policies, as well as, you know, how would we institute the new policy that addresses it.
Right.
So we do get some guidance, to your point, which is a fair point. I can think of, you know, Title IX has recently come out with some regulations that, you know, they're still working on, attorneys still looking at. But we have a Title IX policy, but that policy, based on the new regulations, can potentially affect several other policies. And you get that feedback from PSBA as well. So I don't know if that helps alleviate some of your concerns.
No, it articulates an aspect of where my concern is coming from. And once again, it's not a conspiracy or something like that. It's just understanding, after 3 years sitting on this board and looking at this, I understand how they work. And I think that a good policy is one that's specific, that addresses a specific area of, you know, a problem area or a need or a law or whatever, and these change. And so our policies go through a cycle of changing. And I've sat in enough of these meetings and I've read enough policies to understand. I mean, even the ones that were before us tonight, the back several pages, as you pointed out in an earlier discussion, reference other policies, right? So they're constantly interweaving. And I just think, just like a good law, a good policy, something that is more specific to one area instead of, you know, the kitchen sink approach of a bunch of other things. So that's my point, that I think that this should be tightened up to alleviate that. For example, PSBA is an optional program. We're not required to participate. We participate because PSBA has a similar advisory and similar language to start school boards off on revising or adding or deleting policies. And so being part of the group sometimes is a good thing, right? But we've seen PSBA policies get sent to different school districts, and the different school districts adopt policies that are different from each other. So we're not required to adopt wholesale the language that PSBA sends. We're not required by law to adopt something that PSBA suggests. They're making recommendations and we pay for those recommendations. It's up to us how far, if at all, we amend them, adjust them, adopt them, etc.
Tracy?
Ms. Warner?
So what would you like for this to say, to help clarify?
Well, Bob,
Because,
Bob was close, and I thought that, you know, maybe I thought that I was close also when we're talking about specific to nutrition and exercise, and have it indicate that instead of a broad term like wellness.
So if we were to, and again, just so I understand, we're talking about potentially like changing the title to school wellness regarding nutrition and physical activity.
That works.
Tracy?
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't understand why this is controversial, because the policy defines itself. It says we call wellness nutrition and physical activity. It does not leave any room for interpretation. If things change down the road and, you know, Ronnie comes back and he wants to change or include other things, that would be a different discussion. But right now, I think it's pretty clear. Wellness is the physical education and the nutrition. So I mean, I don't know if, why change, I mean, and it is wellness, right? Both physical education and nutrition are the primary things for wellness. So the policy defines itself. I don't see, for me, there's no room for like other things to sneak in because it's very clear how it's defined.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that it is controversial, and I'm not suggesting any sneaking is occurring or will occur. I'm suggesting that we need to be specific, and I think that that's the job that we do. That's why we're sitting around this table, is making sure that we can offer the best policies for our students in our district at the time, and that the voters have decided we are good people to get that done.
Mr. Hickey?
If we change the name of the policy to say school or student, you know, whatever, as it relates to nutrition and physical activity, if we change it, is everybody good with it?
Yeah, we've also got this line, school environment that promotes student wellness. We've got this line, health and well-being of all students. So as long as those are exclusive and particular to nutrition, nutritional wellness and health, and physical exercise, health and environment.
But I think the first sentence answers that question though, Mike, if you go under purpose. The very first purpose says, student wellness and proper nutrition related to students' physical well-being, growth, development, and readiness to learn. I think if, by leaving that line in there, that is specific as to what the policy is. It doesn't say anything about mental health or threat assessment or anything else like that. So as opposed to being ambiguous in the title, just change the title to be specific and then everything else speaks for itself.
I would agree, it helps a lot. Yep.
Does that get us there?
And that's what we've said. I mean, you've said it, I've said it, I've sort of reconfirmed it.
so it's basically to separate from a health and wellness that we have, because we have a health and wellness policy, correct? That,
We have a mental health.
so you're basically wanting to separate to make sure you're only focusing on your nutrition and well-being.
Right, and then this can be companions of other policies down the road, and they can be referenced and reference others, that's all fine. But as long as we keep it specific, the title specific, and what's happening in the language within it specific to what it is, then I'm happy. And that's a rule with all policies. I think that that's a goal that we should be trying to achieve.
So, just so I'm clear, to Mr. Hickey's point, we would change the name suggestion, obviously would be school wellness regarding nutrition and physical activity.
Ms. Conlon?
I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a problem with that, just because, I mean, there's things like wellness, meaning washing your hands, sanitizing. I don't think that is part of student nutrition and physical activity. It talks about wellness and being healthy, right?
About physical well-being.
And there is another part, it talks about, you know, in terms of safety, and it's, the last section here says, safe routes to school. The district shall cooperate with local municipalities, public safety agency, police departments, community organizations to develop and maintain safe routes to school. So I don't like to narrow that title when they're talking about school wellness. You know, I think it's, Mr. Hickey alluded to it, and I was gonna say that this earlier, that the purpose is pretty well defined of this policy with titled school wellness or student wellness, talking about nutrition, physical well-being. It talks nutrition at least 4 or 5 times in that paragraph, and physical activity, healthy lifestyle.
Where did you read about hand washing and coordination with police?
The very last page.
The hand washing is on the back of the
Safe
third
drinking
page.
water.
Clean, safe meal environment, hand washing, sanitizing.
So it's not exclusive to nutrition, right?
I think
And physical activity.
maybe physical well-being is the phrase that, can we all get behind that? I don't like the idea, by the way, of changing any of the verbiage in the document, but if you want to change the title to student physical well-being or school and student physical well-being or something like that to make it, I think actually that might be helpful, because if as a parent you're flipping through this, it is helpful to have the title be very obvious about what we're talking about. Otherwise, parents are going to spend a long time reading, trying to find what they're looking for. So I would propose that nothing changes except for the title, and it is student physical well-being.
See, that seems more broad. I was going to go the other way. I was going to say, if we're not comfortable with hand washing being part of nutrition and exercise, then we remove it and put it in the other one, which I think we have specific to illness and disease, where we discuss hand washing, and have the two reference each other. That's fine.
But in the physical activity, you
But why wouldn't we want students?
Hold on, this one has been interrupted several times.
Sorry.
Let her finish.
The physical activity is part of that, and that's where it's under, and that's where we have to focus on, is physical activity and nutrition with the physical well-being. It encompasses it all. So
So right, so the hand washing, that's fine, but why would we need to coordinate with a police officer to talk about exercise and nutrition?
No, that's with respect to, I'm sorry, that's with respect to safe routes to school.
Okay,
It's the very last paragraph, so it's
What is-
working with the very last paragraph of the policy itself. It talks about working with local public safety agencies, community organizations, et cetera, when developing and maintaining the safe routes to school.
right, so what does that mean, safe route to school? And how does that relate to nutrition and physical exercise? Are we talking about a school in the city that might need to walk by a bunch of dump trucks, construction sites, and bus stops, theoretically, and that might not be the best route to get to school, and go the other way through neighborhoods and libraries before you, I mean, is that what we're talking about here?
Well, I think, I'm not be 100% sure, but I believe it is with respect to maintaining physical wellness of students en route to school. For instance, if there's a busy street, a busy thoroughfare, if there's a need for a crossing guard, if there's a need to maybe take a different route because of sidewalks.
Right.
It's working and not just, to assume maybe falling under the physical well-being aspect, ensuring the physical safety of the students with respect to their route to and from school.
What did you suggest?
Now,
Student physical well-being.
take this out,
Yep.
put it into transportation.
Yep.
Okay.
What is if we're gonna stick with the wellness and well-being of the physical activity with the nutrition of, right? The safe routes to school should be transportation.
Correct. And I just looked at it. Is walking a mode of transportation? Yes. So we have a transportation policy, correct?
Glad you were able to Google that. We're sure.
The
Yes, it's the one good thing about having a phone in meetings.
Well, when we got to transportation, this could be included
Correct.
when we got there. But it
And we can-
doesn't hurt to have it here as well. It's not,
But to Mike's point is where it all becomes then ambiguous to him, and that's where.
I don't think it's ambiguous.
But-
I think we're arguing
I'm not, I'm.
perfection is keeping us from making progress. And I'd like to make progress. And if we're gonna look at every word,
I actually, I would like to not have duplication as we look at our policy manuals. Because if we have the safe modes of what is it? Safe routes to school in this policy, and then we also have it in the transportation policy, and then someday we update one, you know,
Right.
that doesn't work.
Correct.
Now, Mr. Spring, when are we working on the transportation policy? Is that a 200?
No, that's an 800. That's in operations.
But it is part of the well-being of the students to be, you know, I mean, we are not gonna nitpick them like, I mean, it is, of course, you have to keep them safe. That could fall into many different things, but I'm not bothered having it here.
It certainly
I
doesn't,
pick it, it's fine.
it certainly, to Mr. Roosevelt's point, it's not about nutrition or physical fitness, but if we change it to student physical well-being, I think it's fine. We're not gonna get to the 800s for a while. I alluded to this at our committee meeting, and I said it earlier in this meeting. We put our students first, we're gonna look at the student policies first, and go in that order. If when we get to 800, we wanna add it there and edit this, I would rather not bounce around.
So
I'm
what's
okay
the
with it.
aversion of the three of you that don't want to change the title at all? And don't want to change much of the language, if at all? If the whole policy is specific
Who's
to
the,
nutrition
who are the three?
and physical fitness? The three of you, Ms. Stone?
I just asked Tracy.
I've
if she
asked
wanted
to change the
her
title several times.
Right, but you're excluding specifically nutrition and physical exercise. You want to use the broader term of wellness.
Yes, student well-being is what it is.
Right, so what is if this whole policy is exclusive to nutrition and physical exercise,
But it's not.
which is a part of wellness, what is the problem with having nutritional and physical fitness be part of the title?
Well, because if we leave the transportation thing in there, that doesn't fall under, in my view, nutrition or physical fitness. Hand washing doesn't either,
Or food allergies.
or food
Well,
allergies,
hand
yeah.
washing
Well,
does, though.
nutrition.
You're supposed to wash your hands before you eat. So I think hand washing could have a place in nutrition. I think it's also a good idea to wash your hands after you've had physical exercise, which is why we typically shower after we exercise at the gym or whatever, because you want to remove that off, right? So it is particular to that. And if this policy is primarily about nutrition and physical fitness and what you need to do to be healthy in that environment, what's the problem with adding those two words to this title of this policy?
If I'm a parent and I'm looking quickly through the policy manual and I'm looking to try to find about, you know, what are the rules about, you know, safe transportation to school or something like that, and I just quickly look and it says nutrition and physical fitness, I'm not gonna read any further. It's not gonna occur to me that, you know, hand washing or anything else would be under that.
Well, I don't think you're gonna find, if you're looking about the transportation, you're not gonna, you see student wellness, you're not gonna be thinking walking to school or safe routes either.
Physical well-being, I might, because it's like keeping their body safe to get to
Well,
school.
then we
That's
need
just what I proposed.
Then we need to add more meat to this. If wellness is going to encompass more than just nutrition and physical fitness, which I'm not arguing it doesn't, then this policy is deficient. If this policy is specific to nutrition and physical fitness as it relates to wellness, we should add that in the title. Because if I'm a parent and I'm interested to know about nutrition and physical fitness, I may skip over the school wellness policy.
Ms. Khan?
I have a question, Mr. Spring, regarding the mandated policy, is there any specifics in terms of having wellness in the title of the policy? And then we have what was mandated, a wellness committee, so therefore would that also change the name of the committee to Physical Education and Nutrition Committee?
I believe that I don't believe that the name of the policy is part of the regulation. I do believe that the term wellness committee is. But there's no requirement with respect to the actual title of the policy. But it is, I believe, called a wellness committee under the regulation.
Yeah, this is an easy policy to get over the line, and this is something that we should be able to vote 9-0 on. This should be part of a consent agenda. And so this is an area where to get me to yes, I don't understand why we can't just make the title match the policy. And I don't mind discussing as many policies as we want to go under the term of wellness, or even school wellness. That's fine. That's why we don't have one policy for Council Rock School District. We have loads of policies because there are differences, there are specifics. So I'm fine doing one or the other, but if you're gonna get me to yes, I don't know why we can't change this. To Yoda's point, I don't know why this is controversial. I didn't think it was controversial to have appropriately titled policies that deal with the content within it. But if it is, that's fine. Then I don't want to vote no on this. I want to vote yes. I want to have a policy that deals with nutrition and physical exercise as we're required by the state to do. And I mean, but if you guys want to insist on broad language and broad titles, then there's clearly 5 of you that can do it.
Mr. Roosevelt, how about, I'm trying to figure out a phrase that can satisfy everybody. School nutrition and physical well-being, or student physical well-being?
If it deals with nutrition and fitness should be in the title. We don't have
That's
to,
what
for the benefit of time, we don't have to argue and get the exact title down. I'm just asking for an
Hold on.
amendment to that.
If the title were school nutrition and physical well-being,
Great.
great.
So I do, after this discussion, I do agree that the school wellness is a very broad umbrella. So, and I also think that the way it's defined is very, very tight. You know exactly what the policy is talking about. So I'm also concerned that we need to have this policy just in case there is some kind of if they look into our, policy about nutrition and the funds that we have to make sure we have something there. So if we can come up with a title, I like the student physical well-being. If you want to add something to that, I'm fine with it. I just want us to pass it.
Is the Mr. Spring, can the title be school nutrition and student physical well-being? I think we are all in agreement on that, unless somebody speak now or forever hold your peace.
And it doesn't matter what we call the committee. We have to call it,
It has to
well,
be-
we have to be, right, but that doesn't affect
No,
anything else.
Right.
Because we don't have to rename the committee. We could rename, as long as the committee is doing what they're supposed to do, they can have whatever name it wants.
So Jackie, could you repeat that name?
Has to.
I take-
school nutrition and student physical well-being.
You okay with that?
Or student fitness.
Physical?
School nutrition, student nutrition, fitness should be in there. You can have well-being too, but it's exclusive to nutrition and fitness, personal fitness. As long as those 3 words, nutrition and physical fitness, are in there, you can also have well-being, school, whatever. I'm fine with it.
What if we?
Well, you can be,
He wants to add
well without being fit.
Yeah, I don't really like the addition of the word fitness. Because it's not, I mean, we're not telling them that they have to work out like a certain number of times, or, you don't have to have a 6-pack to go to school.
Can I make it?
Yes.
What if
That would
we,
be nice.
school nutrition, physical activity, and student wellness?
Yes, physical activity, I like that.
All 3 of them.
Physical activity, I like much better than
Got all
fitness.
3, that's fine.
Good.
Say it again then.
I crossed that out. So
You have it?
Yeah, I crossed it out like 3 times, but.
Give it to me.
So it's
Red line.
school nutrition. school nutrition, physical activity, and student wellness.
Physical activity and student. So now we're getting the word wellness back in.
Okay, good. I like physical activity much better.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next policy is the discipline of student convicted / adjudicated of sexual assault. I added 2 items in red that you'll see based on conversations I had with the committee chairs, based on conversations they had with individual board members. And it deals with the transferring of students within a program within district, as well as the return of a student. And the wording that I added with respect to, under the first part where it goes to sending a student potentially out, if the transfer is to an alternative education program within the district, such transfer is subject to board approval based on extenuating circumstances. And then similarly, upon the return, if the victim is no longer enrolled in the district, a student may return if the victim is no longer enrolled in the district and there are extenuating circumstances subject to board approval. So in both cases, it requires extenuating circumstances approved by the board.
I'd like to speak on this for a second, if I may. At our previous meeting, we had some questions about the return of a student who was convicted of sexual assault to school. I think we all agreed that we would be very, very uncomfortable with having a student who was convicted of a sexual assault returning to a Council Rock school, or to any school for that matter. Ms. Stone brought up, the fact that every situation is unique and there might be instances of like is it statutory? Is that what it's called? Statutory rape or something like that. And she thought that the administration should have the flexibility to allow a student back in, not to say that they would or to recommend that they would, but that it should be one of 3 options. Mr. Hickey particularly was very opposed to that. I think reasonably so. He was concerned that we might be putting other students in danger, and I think that's top of mind to all of us as board members. The changes that you will see in front of you are meant to provide a very difficult path for a student to return to the Council Rock School District or any school district, but a path in case there are very, very extenuating circumstances. They would need to be extenuating circumstances, and they would need board approval. So the superintendent could not just say, oh yeah, come on back. We were trying to make it difficult. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Yeah, and you did talk to me, like you said, I still wrestle with this extenuating, and subject to board approval means it needs board approval, not it may need. We have to approve it, or the board, because depending on when this happens, or hopefully ever. Because at least that way, the individual school board member can still vote no and remove himself from any potential liability if something were to occur. I did have a question, because it seemed, this is, I don't want to say ambiguous again, but as I just read through it again, on page 2, underneath the red line, it just says, if the convicted or adjudicated student has already been expelled or transferred, or if the victim does not attend the same school, no additional action is required.
Doesn't mean you can't have additional action.
It just means it's not
It just means it's
required.
not required.
So if they were already expelled for some other reason, we don't have to expel them because they committed a sexual assault.
I'm sorry.
If they were already, if I understand correctly, if they were already expelled for some other reason, we don't have to expel them again. Because they're already expelled. That's what that means, correct?
Correct. But the second part, I think that Mr. Hickey was getting at is, if someone is adjudicated of sexual assault and the victim is no longer in the district,
Correct.
then it's not required, but we can still take the same steps necessary. Because remember, so to your point, a lot of it relates to the victim being present, right? But there are other students. So it doesn't prohibit the board, the school district and administration from taking those other steps. It's just saying it's not mandated that they take those other steps, as it would be if the victim was still in the school.
Yeah, like I said, the fact that whatever extenuating circumstance can mean a lot of things, but the fact that the board or a board would have to approve it, then, I'm more agreeable to it. I'm still not 100% there, but I'm more agreeable to it because, me in particular, I can't imagine me ever voting yes to allowing someone into a school, but in 20 years, I may not be sitting on this board, so.
And I will add that I did, because of these changes, and this is a required policy, mandated policy under the law, I did run it by the solicitor, and he was okay, the solicitor was okay with these changes, and it doesn't affect the legality of the mandated policy.
Yeah, and the other question I had, I believe, was answered actually earlier by Mr. Mahalik, when I said, if something happens at another school and that student is now enrolling in Council Rock, we would be notified that we are allowing a student who has been convicted of a sexual assault. And that would also be subject to board approval, right? That we would, we don't have to necessarily let that kid from Pennsbury in if a kid was convicted in Pennsbury, now it's coming to Council Rock 3 years later or whatever the case may be, we would be notified and we would get to vote on whether or not we allow that kid in our school.
One of the things I think the board has to be cognizant of is the Megan's Law piece of this. A student is convicted of a sexual assault, especially if they're a minor, they're probably going to get listed on Megan's Law. So I don't think you're going to be able to let them back into the school based upon what the stipulations of the Megan's Law violation is in their probation. And if they come back into the school like we do with some parents, we have to escort them everywhere.
Good.
They can't be alone.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification.
Mr. Spring.
The only thing that I wanted to discuss is that, and that among other policies, and I'm not 100% sure yet what the other policies are, because I'm waiting to hear back with respect from the solicitor with respect to review of some amendments to, based on some laws. We are gonna start having an initial discussion with respect to cell phones and electronic devices in school. I think it's, as Dr. Sanko points out, and it's true, it is becoming more of a national conversation. We do have a policy on that already. I think it's important to hear, through our discussions, how that policy is being implemented based on age appropriateness and levels and stuff like that. So it should be an interesting start to the conversation that's already at the national stage.
I did request at our pre-meeting that when we have this conversation, we include principals and teachers. If the board members have any other feedback, this is going to be a long conversation. I would assume that the cell phone policy isn't something that's going to go for, 2 months, first and second read, and we're done. We're going to have to hear from families, hear from teachers. It's going to be a long discussion. But if you have other people, discuss it with Dr. Sanko. We should hear from as many stakeholders as we can.
Right.
Okay. Do we have public comment?
Hi.
Hi.
This has been very enlightening. I'm here,
Introduce yourself.
my name is Nadine Johns. I am I've never lived before, probably never seen me again, so Nadine Johns, Holland. And I am just here regarding the diabetes, thing. So Act 86 absolutely is carrying your child's diabetic supplies with you. However, there's something in here that is very, very concerning to me as a parent with a diabetic child. Also in Act 86, in the letter that we got in August, states that school nurses, in consultation with the school administrator, will identify at least one school employee in each school building attended by a student with diabetes to be designated in a student service program to administer medications, use diabetes monitoring equipment, and provide other diabetic care. This person does not have to be a trained licensed medical professional. Very concerning to me as a mother of a diabetic child, and I just wanted to give a brief synopsis. Our son was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic in 2021. We knew nothing about it, no one that we knew had it. We spent 3 days in the Children's Hospital, and it wasn't because he was so ill, it was because of us taking classes to learn how to treat him. Overwhelming and terrifying to leave. If his sugar's too high, he can go into diabetic ketoacidosis, which is where his blood becomes acidic and it will lead to a coma or death. If it's too low, hypoglycemia, it'll starve his brain of glucose, seizure, coma. His life is literally in our hands all day, every day. His blood sugar is monitored, thankfully, to my phone, and then I'm up at 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. with him every morning checking his blood sugar to make sure he's in range. Sending him back to school was an absolute huge leap of faith. Handing your 8-year-old over to a nurse and a teacher when they have this disease is very difficult to deal with. Fortunately, our nurse is like a small, blonde-headed Italian version of Mother Teresa. She's phenomenal. I love her to death. She's literally been a lifesaver. The teachers have been wonderful as well, but the truth of the matter is, anything that has to do with his diabetes, she's the one that they go to. That's what makes my husband and I comfortable with. That's what I'm sure makes all the teachers comfortable with. And most of all, what makes my son most comfortable with. She is his safe space in school, and that's how we would like to keep it. Type 1 diabetes is ever changing. Diet, weather, puberty, illness, flavoring in liquid Tylenol will skyrocket him. So these are all things that encompass every day with this child. We meet on our team at CHOP, who we see every 3 months, and there's constant communication with the nurse. Because she gets it, because she's trained, because she's a nurse. To designate an employee who isn't medically trained and is not a licensed healthcare provider and allow them to treat and manage this disease, especially in younger children who don't get it and who don't know, to me is severely irresponsible. I would never allow someone to draw the syringe and inject my child with insulin who wasn't certified trained. This happened to a friend of ours, which is why one of the reasons why I'm here tonight. His 6-year-old went into a nurse who wasn't properly trained. Instead of getting 3.0 units of insulin, she gave him 30, and he was in the ICU for 9 days. So that's right here with me all of the time. We work closely with the school in relation to his 504, but this significant change I'm very concerned with because it is in that policy in an umbrella fashion. And I guess I'm just here to ask the board to really take a look at that specific notation in there, because it's very concerning, and we do have shortage of nurses. I can tell you firsthand, it is nurse roulette in our school, and I completely understand. I work well with the nurses. They're phenomenal. I have no complaints, but I have seen Bayada nurses on school trips and everywhere else. And I'm just concerned that with a nursing shortage and this potential proposal, that we would be allowing an employee to take over the position of a nurse in lieu of a nurse being there. And as a parent with a diabetic child, I'm just not okay with that. So I'm just here to ask for a reconsideration or clarification of that. Make me sleep better at night and tell me there's always going to be a nurse at the school and you'll never hear from me again.
So you just kind of read my mind.
Okay.
We did specifically speak to Mr. Devlin about this.
Okay.
And that concern. And he indicated that at all our schools, it is only the nurse professionals who are administering diabetes management treatments.
Okay.
Period, stop. It was specifically asked to him, and that was his.
I appreciate the clarification. I'm sorry to waste
No,
your time.
thank you.
But I just, when I got this, it was kind of, and we are fly under the radar type people, like this is, we just go with the flow, adapt, overcome. This, when you're talking about a little kiddo whose life is dependent on other people, in my head I was just picturing like a janitor like coming in and like being like, sure, here you go, and worst case scenario.
And if you had that concern, other people had that concern. So
Absolutely.
thank you for allowing us to clarify.
And let me Tell me if this says, under that whole section about the trained personnel, it says parent, guardian, and student's healthcare practitioner must provide written authorization for such administration. Would that,
It also says that we can decline, but when I reached out to our principal and I said, where can we decline and where is the authorization? She had no idea what I was talking about. So apparently this has always been in the policy, but when, this is my first time, I guess, because my guy is kind of newly diagnosed and seeing it, and I'm just like, I'm being that mom.
No, and it's a great point, but I can tell you, we did have that conversation.
Okay.
yeah,
It is only the nurses who administer.
I appreciate the
Got it.
clarification, and again, I'm
But
sorry
we
for.
don't want to put that in the policy.
I'd have to check to see if we're required.
I kind of asked that question when we reviewed the
I think-
policy. I asked specifically about that.
Yeah, and I think that's what-
Yes, because I said, why would anyone else other than the nurse?
I think it's depending on different districts, different sizes of districts, age, stuff like that.
Mr. Hickey?
Not that
Thank
it
you.
matters, and I'm sure this doesn't help you at all,
Sure.
what I'm gonna say to you, but it does say, when it says training of other school personnel, it says shall receive diabetes care training appropriate to the responsibilities for students with diabetes.
Right.
So, I know you said you went through like 3 days or something, I would assume, and I don't like, bad thing, that anybody who would be on that class trip or whatever, that maybe where the nurse isn't there or whatever, they would have that proper training as it relates to
Right,
diabetes, and in your case.
Right, and my rebuttal to you is every kid is different, some have pumps, don't have pumps. On the second day of school, my son was up with a blood sugar of 38 the night before and was late to school the next day. I had to relay that to the nurse because that changes things and then she talks to the teacher. So I think if we're bringing somebody else in, then communication, there just has to be a bridge. I would reject it altogether, and luckily he's getting older, but when you have a kindergartner who comes in who's at the mercy of whatever, you know what I mean, and they don't fully understand the scope of this disease, they just rely on that person, and the training is so insane. Like even to this day, I'm 3 years in and I'm still contacting CHOP. If he throws up, he's probably going in the hospital. Like there's certain things that happen. So it's just that process. I'm glad that this was clarified. I'm good and he's getting older, so he'll be more able to self-manage and maybe I'll be able to sleep a little bit more. But I just wanted to clarify with you and I appreciate that, so.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Just really quickly, I think that the intent of this, and maybe it deserves another look at it from all of us, doesn't prevent passing, right? But I believe the intent of it, to your point, was to find somebody that your child is comfortable with. And to make sure that that individual is specifically understanding of your child's needs, and to start a dialogue between the family and the school regarding the specific severity, because it can be extreme and broad and difficult. And purpose number 4, to minimize the possibility that diabetes-related emergencies will disrupt classroom activities. So, to Mr. Spring's point, there's going to be a medically trained person in the school, but when there's not, or something, to the other point, that this covers a lot of different districts, the intent is to make sure that somebody is there that the family approves of, to make sure that you don't have the emergency.
Right, and at the 504 meeting that we all had in the beginning of the year, we are lucky enough to meet with the teacher and go over everything with the teacher and say, this is what you look out for. If he's acting like this, if he looks very pale or whatever, and it's wonderful, but in my mind, sometimes I go to if the teacher isn't there, if the nurse is sick, like what happens, because it's just vital with him and it can change like that. By the time he feels that his legs are weak, his blood sugar is already very, very low. So I appreciate there being somebody, there, and the teacher can kind of to step in, and they know me by now, I'm always there, but to have another liaison, I get it, but to actually inject and retreat and monitor, that's where I'm at. But I feel much better now, so I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And let's give a special shout out to all of the nurses because they are
Oh my God.
amazing.
Love Teresa, yeah.
Everything's moving forward to a second read. And we'll vote on approving it at the next meeting. Okay?
And the few modifications that we discussed, I'll email out to everyone by the end of this week.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely by the end of this week. Yeah.
in red?
Red lines.
Midline, okay.
We just see if Mr. Hidalgo is on the phone. I don't know if he ever joined us or not.
Mr. Hidalgo.
Val, if someone is on the phone?
I
Okay,
don't think so anyone was.
all right. Meeting adjourned.